Good afternoon, everybody, and it's good to be back with you on this Thursday as we look at another psalm. And today, I want to discuss Psalm 110. So if you would, just take a moment and pause the video and go read Psalm 110. The psalm itself is only 6 verses. You should be able to get through it pretty quickly. So after you're done reading that, come back into the discussion, and then you can keep on going. I'll assume that you've read it at this point, so I'm going to continue. So there's great history behind Psalm 110. It's a very fascinating psalm in that it fits so well within a particular experience from David. And so we can fit it within his history very, very well. As I said, it fits within David's life. So if you know David's history, his life, his experiences, all about David, which you can gather all the history you need from reading 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. It's all there to help you understand about this character of David. If you understand his history very well, you'll see how Psalm 10 fits right into an experience that he had. And I'll talk about this coming up. Now, Psalm 110 also has some incredible importance for the New Testament. It is used 2 different ways in the New Testament. This is what's so critical. So Jesus uses it a certain way, and then the writer of Hebrews uses it a certain way also. So it's used in the first 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So it shows up in Matthew 22, Mark 12, and Luke 20. And it's in a spot where Jesus is posing a question to the religious leaders. The religious leaders have been pounding him with questions at this time. And Jesus turns the table and he poses a question to them. And the point of the matter is he uses Psalm 110 and he says, why does David call basically the Son of Man or the Messiah Lord if he is his son? The idea is that the Messiah is greater than David. Son of David would mean he's a son, so he's lesser than. Well, no. Jesus is saying, no, you can scratch that idea. The Messiah is much, much greater than David himself. So he kind of obliterates the connection with David and leans more upon the divine connection with God in that essence in Matthew, the Matthew representations in Mark and Luke. It also shows up in Acts chapter 2, 34 through 35. And this is part of Peter's great sermon in Acts, and he uses Psalm 110. He uses it to connect Jesus with David. So he's using it differently than what Jesus used it. So it's very important for Peter to connect Jesus to David to show that messianic linkage. Now in Hebrews, it's used in a similar way, and it's used in Hebrews chapter 5 and chapter 7. And the idea is to use Psalm 110 to make the claim that Jesus is a high priest for Christianity. In fact, he's a valid high priest in the new covenant, even though Jesus does not come from the priestly line, which would be the tribe of Levi. Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah, if you remember correctly. And so we'll unpack this a lot more as we go on. I'm going to concentrate on Hebrews 5 and 7 at the very end. That would be our New Testament connection. But just understand this is a widely used psalm, and it's used 2 different ways. This is what's interesting. It's used 2 different ways by the people who are using it in the New Testament. Now, Psalm 110 is a coronation psalm. What do I mean by that? This would have been a psalm that would have been read during the ceremony of the crowning of a king. It would fit, as I said, within David's life really, really well. So we could probably think of the initial use of this psalm probably fitting within the reign of David. Probably right, not at the very initial reign. I'll get to this in a little bit, but maybe a little bit later on. But anyway, it was used then, and I'll get into this later, but I want to bring this up real quickly. If you remember, if you go back and read about David's history, he was the leader of the tribe of Judah, or the king of the tribe of Judah, for the first 7 years of his reign. So the rest of the tribes, the other 11 tribes, did not recognize David as king. It was after 7 years that he became king of all Israel. So initially he was only king of the tribe of Judah. Then later on he became king of all of Israel after 7 years. This psalm probably would have been the coronation psalm or the crowning psalm that was read during his his rule over all of Israel, or the beginning of that rule itself. So now the wording in itself in the psalm seems pretty odd to us because, really it's high language about a human. Literally, the psalmist is saying something to the effect of, The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Basically, someone's observing this scene, this coronation scene going on, and they're saying the Lord, God, is telling David that sit at my right hand until all these things are taken care of. And so we have this really, really high language. Like, how can a person sit next to God? Well, it's not necessary. There's not proximity anyway, as far as where the king sits. It's not as if God's sitting right there, but it is strong language about the support and the aid that God is willing to give. Now, because of our American history, we tend to think pretty poorly of kings and monarchs. That way, we tend to think of these people in a negative way because, really, these kind of people are considered by that culture to be more than equal to other people. The king is considered to be the greatest citizen, the most important citizen, or the most important person, a part of that kingdom, that nation, that community. And we tend to have negative feelings about that because we always think everybody's equal. You know why? Well, because our Declaration of Independence says so. That kind of idea. But ancient people didn't think that way. And so we've got to remove our modernized, way of thinking about so many things when we come to these the scriptures, because if we import our modern perceptions into the text, we are always going to be wrong with what it says. Start by understanding what the ancient people or what was going on in the ancient culture. Ancient people didn't have a problem with their kings being more than equal. They thought of their kings as being greater than themselves. So that's not a problem for them. In fact, most cultures, this is going to sound bizarre. In fact, I can only think of one I shouldn't say it, it's not in the whole world anyway. We're talking about it's called the Ancient Near East. This is basically the Middle East, Northern Africa, Mediterranean Basin area, that kind of idea. But mostly the Middle East. And most people in this region considered their kings to be an extension of a god. For Israel, it was big G God. For other cultures, it was small G God. Everybody considered their king to be some kind of an extension of a god, except one nation that I know of, which is really odd. Assyria. Assyria never thought of their kings that way. They were very militaristic. Don't want to talk about Assyria at this time, but I understand that they were a very militaristic group. But as far as other cultures, Egypt, Israel, all the Canaanite cultures, Babylon, all considered their kings to be connected to a god, an extension of a god to some degree. Son of God kind of idea also. So ancient Israel would have viewed their king just as well as an extension as a god. And in fact, we have this kind of language coming up in Psalm 2. So it's not like we're projecting this upon the text. It's there in the text itself how the ancient people viewed their kings. Now, in the text itself, in verse 1, we're going to get into this real quickly. There is a clear distinction in the Hebrew between God and a human king. If our English translations would bring this out, it wouldn't be a problem. But for some reason, our English translations don't, and they translate two different Hebrew words as Lord. And I'm going to explain to you why here in a second. And so in our understanding, in English, we can't really differentiate because all we have is Lord. That's all we have. But there would be better ways to translate the second Lord. Okay? And so we'll get to that here in just a second. So just bear with me. Now, so it's a coronation psalm within David's lifetime. Keep that in mind. Now, verse 1. So there's a presentation here in verse 1 of an image being projected. We have an image of like a royal courtroom. This is the idea. And so what we have is a human representative being presented here. God is giving a human representative for his desires, his goals, his ideas, so forth and so on. And he is endowing that person with great authority. Okay, so we have the Lord says to my Lord in verse 1. Okay, now there are two different Hebrew words used here for Lord. So many of you probably heard about Adon, and you know that Adon is a word. It's not Adon, Adonai. Adonai would be my Lord. In fact, if you had all of it here, Adonai, it is that as far as my Lord, Adonai. But The I on the end of it is just a personal pronoun. Adon is the word for Lord. Okay, so the first Lord is actually Yahweh, verse 1. So the Yahweh, in fact, it's not even the, Yahweh to my Lord. That's what it is. Yahweh to my Lord, set to my right. That's exactly what it says. So he says, Yahweh to my Adon. Yahweh to my Adon, set at my right hand. Set to my right. That idea. So the first one is Yahweh. That's the first Lord. That is the personal designation given to God. In fact, God told Moses at the burning bush, this has been in Exodus chapter 3, going into 4, but mostly Exodus 3. When Moses asked, well, who should I say sent me to get the Israelite people out of Egypt? Well, this is what the name that God gives him. So this first one is definitely a reference to God, the Lord, or God. Now, the next one is Adon. Adon is not a formal declaration. It's very, very informal. The idea of master or sir, it would never be applied to the Lord, except the Jewish people had a superstition isn't the right word. They were worried that if they misused the name of the Lord, that it would cause them problems. So they would never speak Yahweh. In fact, we're not even sure if it's spoken Yahweh. We know all the consonants are there because Hebrew is a consonant language. We know the consonants. We're just not sure about the vowel vocalizations that connect the consonants together. But most scholars think it's Yahweh. That is a personal designation for God. The next part is to David, Adon. So whenever they would come across Yahweh in the text, what they would do is they would rewrite the vowel vocalizations to represent Adon. They didn't change the consonants. They wouldn't change the text. They only changed the vowels. Why would they change the vowels? Because the vowels aren't in the original text. So for them, they're not messing up the text by adding vowels. So they can do that freely. So they would add the vowels for Adon to Yahweh. So you saw the vowel markings there. You would say, yeah, it's spelled with the consonants Yahweh, but I say Adon here. And again, that was just because they were afraid to speak the Lord's name. Adon is not the name that God gave Moses. Okay, so in verse 1 of Psalm 110, basically it's saying, God to David is what it's saying. Okay, Yahweh to my Lord. Yahweh to my Adon. That's what it is. So we have this distinction being presented here. Now, in this person is given great authority. The human person, the Adon, the king, David, is given great authority. Set at my right hand. Now again, a human king cannot sit at the right hand of God. We know that. But the ancient people didn't understand that. They actually kind of thought of the king being able to ascend into the heavens. They weren't given audience with the king all the time. So the king was a mysterious character that you only saw every now and then. You don't know what happens behind closed doors. And I'm just saying this is just the way that life is for ancient people and a lot of people. They just didn't really know. And so you project these ideas upon your culture, upon your king. But anyway, the idea is that God is going to give this person unwavering support. This person is right there as far as proximity. The Lord is, now the king's not sitting at the right hand. That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying is the Lord is, his full attention is there for the king. And the king, and God is going to do something for the king. And actually, he's going to fight his battles. So it is Yahweh who's going to make the enemies for the king, or is going to make their enemies into a footstool, is what I should say. Now, the footrest image, the footstool. The footrest image is actually the idea of conquering an enemy. When you conquered an enemy, the conquered enemy entity would come forward, and the leader of that group would prostrate themselves before the conquering leader, king, whatever it was, general, and then that conqueror would actually place their foot upon the back of the neck of someone. And so the idea was that putting your foot on the back of someone's neck was that you have full control over that person. You can stomp their neck and they could no longer live. That kind of idea. You have full control over the future of this person's life, whatever, or the enemy's existence. You have full control. And so that's the kind of idea that's being presented here, is that it's going to show dominance. If the king remains devoted to God, there's not going to be any problems. God is the one that's going to make all this happen for the king. However, the king must remain devoted to the Lord. You see, it's not the job of the king. It's not the role of the king to provide security. This is what the psalmist is saying. In fact, if you look at Israelite history, this is what goes on. When they start to do their own little personal plans for security, that's when things start to fall apart. When they start to displace God and start to replace it with their own devices, their own plans, that's when things start to fall apart. God tells them over and over, rely on me and I'll take care of you. And that's exactly what he's saying here. The king must stay devoted. And the king has to provide the spiritual direction for God, toward God, and the zeal. He's supposed to be the example for the rest of the nation. So that's what's going on. Now in verse 2, we have the scepter image coming up. And the scepter is actually, the image has already been brought up in Psalm chapter 2. Psalm 2 is also a psalm dedicated to a king. In fact, Psalm 1 and 2 probably go together. I remember I did that at the very beginning of the study, and we talked about that. But anyway, the image of this scepter, staff, comes from Psalm chapter 2. And it's a kingly scepter, staff, that kind of idea. But anyway, this banner, this symbol, whatever, is going to go out from Zion. That would be Jerusalem, the nation of Israel. And they would have, there would be a rule amongst the neighboring countries. In fact, David had a very expansive, he expanded Israel's boundaries quite a bit. Solomon's going to expand them even further, but the devoted king will be successful, that kind of idea. Now, if you go on to verse 3, now the latter part of verse 3, the part that says the dew of your youth will be yours, I'm looking at the ESV. I'm not really sure what other translations are going to say on this instance. But here's the thing. That last line, no one understands what it's even trying to say. In fact, some translations will say the Hebrew is untranslatable. It's really, really weird or odd what it does say. I translated it literally, and it says something like this. I backed up just a little bit. From the womb of a dawn, a morning dew of youth. That's what it actually says. I don't know what a morning dew of youth actually means. Maybe refreshing kind of idea. I'm not really sure. But we can look at the Old Greek. Now, it may help us out. I only do this if there's a problem in the Hebrew. But the Old Greek, and I think this is probably where a lot of our translations have kind of leaned toward. But anyway, the Old Greek talks about from the womb of a dawn, or the womb of a beginning womb, or something like that. Like the first birth. The first child I have, I birthed you. That kind of idea. But regardless, the initial portion of this verse is a celebration. It's a celebration of the success of a king. And the success of the king only happens when that king is completely devoted to the Lord. Then good things start to happen. Now, verse 4 is where things get interesting again. So we have this person, Melchizedek, being presented. Okay, so we got to unpack this person. But anyway, in this verse, the king is given priestly authority. The king is given priestly authority. Which is odd, because we always think of like there's a king, and then there's a separate person who's a priest, and a separate person who's a prophet, that kind of idea. Well, it's not that way in this instance. We have a king who is given the authority of a priest. So now we have like a dual function here going on. And it's with David. Now, the line of the priests came from the tribe of Levi. David comes from the tribe of Judah. So priests come from the tribe of Levi. And kings, or David, came from the line of Judah. Now this person, Melchizedek's not even an ancient Hebrew person. So he's not even a Hebrew at all. So don't worry about him. Okay? We'll talk about him just in a second. He is pre-Hebrew people. Before their nation, let's put it that way. He's around when Abraham's around. And Abraham is the beginning of the Hebrew people. Anyway, Now, in David's time, after King Saul, let's put it that way, David is the second king, and after that, all the kings will come from the tribe of Judah. In fact, Genesis 49, a lot of people think of it as being a messianic prophecy. I don't necessarily think so, but Jacob tells Judah that the scepter will never depart from his tribe. Basically, is that the idea? Meaning that, I mean, you can read things into it for sure, but a lot of people read into this idea of the kingly lineage that's going to go through the tribe of Judah. However, historically, we know this. After David's reign, from David on until the kingdom splits, there's going to be a split of the kingdom after the reign of Solomon. All the kings came from the line of Judah, and after it splits, Judah stays its own nation, a southern kingdom, and it will continue that. All the kings will come from the line of David. Now, when the northern kingdom splits off, that's no longer possible for them to have a king from the line of David. The Davidic line comes through Judah. That tribe is a separate nation. So they no longer have this succession of leaders that could take you back to David. They have to go a different route. But anyway, basically the kings from, what I was trying to say was the kings basically come from the tribe of Judah, and the priests always come from the line of Levi. And so there were no Levite kings, there was no kings that came from the tribe of Levi, and there's no priests that come from the line of Judah, except for, in this instance, David is given kingly status and priestly status. The Lord swears by it. He's not going to change his mind. Even on the Old Covenant, he would say that priests have to come through the line of Levi. Well, in this instance, he's going to give this authority to David, and he's not going to change his mind. Now we have this person, Melchizedek. Who's this character? So Melchizedek first shows up in Genesis 14. This is around the time of Abraham. Hebrew people aren't even a people yet. This is the very beginning of the Hebrew people. Abram is the beginning. Abram's nephew, Lot, is captured by some Canaanite kings. Abraham takes some men out of his own household, 318 to be precise, and he goes to battle against these Canaanite kings. And he is able to overcome them, and he is able to rescue his nephew, Lot. Now, after he rescues Lot, he receives all the bounty from the battle, and as he's going back, he passes by this place called Salem. And a person comes out to see him. The person that comes out is Melchizedek. So, a couple things about this guy. His name, Melchizedek, means King of Righteousness. And he's called a priest of the Most High, of the Most High. But we have no indication of this person ever having any interaction with God. So prior to Genesis 14, there's no mention of Melchizedek. So we don't know, what his status is. I would say he's probably just more of a general type of generalist as far as in the priestly function. Whatever God you had, he'd try to be the go-between between whatever God it was, is what I would probably say. But we have no indication of God ever discussing anything with Melchizedek, choosing him for anything, or any of that respect. All it is he shows up in this story. He comes out, and Abraham gives him a tithe of the bounty. And when he does so, it indicates that Abram thinks of himself as lesser than Melchizedek. He thinks the status of Melchizedek is of greater value, so he gives to him that kind of idea. And then Melchizedek gives the blessing back to him. So Melchizedek's in Genesis 14. Then he shows up again in Psalm 110 here. And he also shows up in Hebrews 5 and 7. So he shows up in 4 portions of the text of the Bible, the complete Bible, 4 portions. That's it. This name, this person never shows up as far as a reference or a real character or anything like that. So now David is given this priestly status, as I said, according to the order of Melchizedek. Now Melchizedek is not a Hebrew person. He's not a Hebrew person. But he's given this status of a priest. Now, this overcomes the lineage problem. Remember, the lineage problem is that David is from the tribe of Judah. tribe of Judah cannot produce a priest. It has to come from the tribe of Levi. Well, David's not from the tribe of Levi, so something has to happen. So God does something different here. Now, why does God do this? Why is David given priestly status? That's the right question to ask. Why? Well, if you know the history, we're going to go through it real quickly, why this is possible. Or what, not possible, why this happened. Let's put it that way, because it did happen. 2 Samuel chapter 5. David becomes king of Judah, and he's king of Judah for 7 years. After the 7 years, he becomes king of all of Israel. In fact, there's a little bit of a civil war type of skirmish going on, but he eventually ends up being king of all Israel. Now, 2 Samuel chapter 6. The Ark of the Covenant is not in Jerusalem. This is right after David captures Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem hadn't even been captured from the days of Joshua, from the days of all the judges. Jerusalem had never been captured. Well, David finally captures it. And this has to be the place where Melchizedek was at. He's the king of Salem. It's the same place where most scholars are certain. But anyway, David wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem from this other place. Now, the Philistines have had it. They captured it. And then God did he worked some miracles to make their life very, very horrible because they captured the ark, and so they released the ark back to the Israelites, but the Israelites are afraid to bring it back to Jerusalem, and so they just leave it in this area, this region, under the management of some other people. Anyway, they're really scared of the ark. David now, he wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem. So David and 30,000 military men and these two guys by the name of Uzzah and Ahio go. Now these last two, Uzzah and Ahio, are the sons of Abinadab. They are not priests. This is the key. They are not priests. So why David goes without priests, I don't know. But he does. So they are not priests. So as they're going from, in fact, I think the place is called Beer Judah. It's a Beor Judah or something like that. It's not. It's away from Jerusalem, far enough that they have to go and get it and retrieve it. I'm not sure how far they travel, but anyway, they're trying to bring the ark back, and as they're bringing it back on this cart, they must have hit a rut or a rock or something. The ark topples, and it looks like it's going to slide off the cart. Uzzah reaches up to try to stop it. Now the ark's not very big. It's a small. It's only like maybe 1 yard long, and it's not even that. It's not real big. Anyway, he puts his hand up to stop it, which he could do. Physically, he could do that. But when he touches the ark, he dies. Now, David is very upset about this. In fact, they abandon their goal of trying to bring the ark to Jerusalem for a while, and they just leave it in custody of someone else for a while David figures out what he wants to do. Now, later on, David returns. He's going to try to bring the ark back again. At this time, he comes back. But when he goes, if you look at the 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I think I can't remember exactly where it's at. It might be verse 14 or so. But it's verse 11, I think. In verse 11, chapter 6, it says that he puts on this linen ephod. Well, guess what? That's the ephod of the priests. So David puts on the priestly garments. And he goes out and he performs sacrifices to the Lord as they travel with the ark. So David is behaving like a priest. Now, where would David ever get this kind of idea that he could even do this? Because this is not normal. This is completely abnormal. This doesn't happen. Well, it has to come from Psalm 110. After he secures reign for the entirety of all of Israel, I'm going to put it in, this is my progression of my chronology, let's put it this way. After he becomes king of all of Israel, Psalm 110 is his coronation psalm. It's read, and in that psalm he is given this priestly authority, and from that he knows he can go back and get the ark, and so he does, and he performs the functions of a priest as he brings the ark back to Jerusalem. Now, verses 5 and 6, we have a reinforcement of the message of God's protection for the people, or for the king, basically. Again, if the king will stay devoted to the Lord will always be there for any help. For David, the Lord's always going to be there for any help. But the king must remain devoted, that kind of idea. Verse 7, the idea of drinking from the brook is the idea of being refreshed, lifting up your head, being aware of your surroundings, that kind of idea. So it's a refreshing idea. Drinking from the water kind of reminds me of going back to Psalm 1, being like the tree planted by that refreshing brook. You're always prospering, you're always successful. Again, it's the king who remains devoted to the Lord who will always be successful and never have to worry about their security or their well-being. Okay, let me talk about Hebrews real quick, where this shows up. Just a few minutes of your time and I'll be done. So it shows up again in Hebrews 5 and 7 as far as this use of Psalm 110. Now it shows up in other places too. As I said, it shows up in the Gospels. It also shows up in Acts. But I want to talk about the way it's used in Hebrews 5 and Hebrews 7. So Hebrews 5 reveals that Jesus, after he ascended back to the Father, after his glorification, that he is the priest for Christianity. Now we have a problem again. Okay? Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. So, according to Old Covenant standards, there's no way that he could be a priest because he's not from the line of Levi. Well, God overcomes this. And in Hebrews chapter 7, he reveals why Jesus is able to do this and also why he is an advocate of a better covenant. So, the argumentation in chapter 7 is that he is a better high priest than your Old Covenant earthly priest because, first of, Jesus is the Son of God. And because he's the Son of God, he's a much better high priest. His suffering, he understands our experiences. It makes him a better advocate on our behalf. His position, Jesus' position to the Lord, he is sitting at the right hand. We can think of that as a proximity that is real, a space that is real. I mean, he's literally sitting right there as a position of authority. And so it makes him much better because he's right there near the Lord. And then lastly, his overall ministry is greater than any kind of Old Covenant priest. So Jesus is our advocate, and he is a better advocate than what anyone could have experienced under the Old Covenantal system. So if you think about Jesus, what makes him better just from a ministerial perspective? Think of it this way. If you read through the Gospels and you see how Jesus interacts with people, the kindness that he shows, the patience that he shows, well, all that empathy and all that concern and care is there for us also as Christians. We read about it in the Gospels, but we experience it as Christians ourselves. The proximity that he has to God makes our pleas and our prayers more pertinent. It gives us more assurance of our pleas and prayers being heard and something happening on our behalf. Let's put it that way. He knows, again, I said this before, but he knows our troubles because he was a human. Jesus experienced all the difficulties that we had, and he made it through, so he understands our predicament very well, very, very well. And lastly, Jesus just accepts us. He accepts us as we are. We don't come to Jesus perfect. We come to Jesus as we are. He knows all about our sin, and he knows all about us, but he still chooses to love us. And God's love for us has to be most evident through the ministry of Jesus. So yes, Jesus is the perfect expression of God's love to us. All right, I hope you've enjoyed that, and I look forward to talking about another psalm next week, and I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Bye.